Agatha Raisin and the promise in Toni's email. When a scandalous email turns Castley upside down, Agatha Raisin discovers that in the Cotswolds, even gossip can kill. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Castley woke beneath a low quilt of drizzle, the sort of damp that soaked through gossip as easily as laundry. Agatha Raisin, not yet dressed for battle, stood in her kitchen wearing a scarlet dressing gown that had seen too many mornings and too few miracles. Her coffee had gone cold, her cigarette was burning unevenly in the ashtray, and Hodge sat upon the table looking smugly alive while she felt half dead. The telephone shrilled. Agatha glared at it as if daring it to have bad news. It did. "Mrs. Raisin? It's me, Toni. I've done something awful." Agatha ground the cigarette out with the precision of a surgeon. "You're 23, Toni. That covers quite a lot of ground. Define awful." There was a swallow then. "I sent an email to the wrong people." "Who?" "Everyone." The ensuing explanation, full of hiccuped phrases and horror, painted the picture. A message meant for her boyfriend, a fellow from Mercester who fancied himself both romantic and computer literate, had gone to the entire Mercester Business Network mailing list, which included half of Agatha's clients. Worse, the message had promised to reveal a scandal that could ruin everything. Agatha felt the blood rise beneath her foundation. "You've told an entire county that our agency is sitting on a scandal? Brilliant. Why not send it to the Times next?" "I didn't mean to," Toni squeaked. "Intent rarely mitigates idiocy," Agatha said, reaching for another cigarette. Hodge sneezed in disapproval. Within minutes, Agatha was out of her cottage, car keys jangling like sabres. The drizzle had turned to a mean mist, blurring the hedgerows into damp ghosts. She reversed her hatchback down the lane with the aggression of a woman betrayed by technology and youth. The drive to Mercester gave her time to smoke 2 cigarettes, reapply lipstick and rehearse several speeches that began with, "How dare you?" When she finally pulled up outside the Raisin and Associates office, a knot of reporters stood on the pavement like vultures in raincoats. One flashed a camera. "Is it true you're representing the woman behind the scandal?" he called. Agatha stiffened. "I represent civilization, which you lot abandoned when you bought those ties," she snapped, marching past. Inside, the office was chaos. The fax machine was clattering like a woodpecker, the phone blinked with messages, and poor Toni sat pale behind her desk, eyes wide, fingers twisting a tissue into lace. "They're saying I leaked a political affair," Toni whispered, "or that you bribed someone in Mercester Council. It's everywhere." Agatha inhaled sharply, then caught sight of something that stopped her retort. Toni's desk was bare. "Where's your laptop?" Toni blinked. I left it here last night. It's gone." Agatha crossed the room, scanning the carpet as though clues might be hiding in the pile. The window latch was unfastened. A faint smear of mud marked the sill. Rain tapped the glass with self-importance. "Someone's nicked it," she said, "either to cover your mistake or to make it worse." "But who would? Everyone loves a scandal, Toni. Some prefer to manufacture one." She rang Bill Wong at once. His tone was patient, which annoyed her. "Agatha, it sounds like a simple theft. Maybe an opportunist." "Rubbish. Opportunists don't print off confidential emails and feed them to gossip sheets before breakfast." "What makes you think they did?" "Instinct. And the smell of cheap ambition. It's everywhere." Bill sighed audibly. "Just don't start interrogating people again. We'll send a constable." "Lovely. He can take statements from the pigeons while I do the real work." She hung up before he could reply. A knock interrupted her plotting. Doris Simpson, cleaner and unofficial moral watchdog, peered round the door, her plastic headscarf beaded with rain. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin. You'll want to know the chap from the Mercester Gazette was nosing round the bins. Said he found an empty sherry bottle with lipstick on." Agatha blinked. "And this matters because—" "Because you wear lipstick," Doris said cheerfully. "So does the Queen, Doris. I doubt she's been at our bins." The woman left, murmuring that she was only saying. Red herring, Agatha thought, but at least it confirmed the gossip cycle was at full spin. Toni re-emerged from the back office holding a printed copy of the infamous email. The words, "I promise you'll have the proof soon, and they'll all pay for what they've done," glared from the page. "It looks worse in print," Toni said weakly. "Everything does," Agatha replied. "Except me. She paced the floor, cigarette trailing smoke like thought made visible. "Who's the boyfriend?" Toni hesitated. "Ben Bly. He's Marion Bly's nephew. You know, the property woman who owns half of Mercester." Agatha stopped pacing. Good grief, that dragon. She'd sue a mirror for showing her wrinkles. "Ben says she cheated him out of his inheritance. I only meant to help." By threatening exposure in an email that reads like a ransom note, Toni's eyes filled. It wasn't meant for anyone else to see. Agatha's voice softened despite herself. "No catastrophe ever is. All right, we'll fix it. But from now on, no more promises, emails, or boyfriends who can spell inheritance." She strode to the window. Across the street, the reporters still lingered, sheltering beneath umbrellas like damp herons. One held up a mobile phone, an enormous grey brick of a thing, and mouthed, "Smile, Mrs Raisin." Agatha drew the blinds with military precision. "Parasites," she muttered. The rain eased by afternoon. Bill arrived, notebook in hand, expression wary. He examined the window latch, took statements, and promised to be in touch. His politeness only fueled her irritation. "You don't believe a word of this," she accused once they were alone. "I believe there's been an accident, followed by panic. That's not a crime." "You wait," Agatha said darkly. "There's always a crime waiting underneath panic. It's how human nature hides its spots." Bill smiled faintly. "Try not to make any more headlines today." When he'd gone, Agatha sank into her chair, exhaling smoke rings at the ceiling. The office felt too quiet, with no Hodge around to pretend she was in control. "Don't look at me like that," she told him. "At least you've never sent an email." Outside, the last of the drizzle glimmered on the cobbles. Somewhere in the office below, the fax machine sputtered and delivered a single sheet. Agatha bent to pick it up. The message was typed, unsigned. "Keep your promise, or lose more than your reputation." She stared at it, a slow thrill replacing the fatigue. The PR disaster had just grown teeth. By evening, the Red Lion was in full roar. The fire smoked, the carpet smelled faintly of beer and disinfectant, and half of Carsley had gathered to discuss the scandal. Agatha entered to the polite hush reserved for famous sinners. "Ah, Mrs Raisin," said Doris Simpson, polishing a pint glass she had no right to own. "I hear your young assistant's been dabbling in electronic mischief. Emails, they're the devil's postcards." "Then you'll feel right at home with them," Agatha retorted, shouldering to the bar. Bill Wong, nursing a half-pint, caught her eye. "You're becoming quite the folk-tale, Agatha, the poisoned promise of Carsley." "If anyone's poisoned, it's me," she said, ordering gin. "And I've half a mind to dose the next person who smirks." Mrs Bloxby appeared at her elbow, radiating tranquil sympathy. "Perhaps kindness would serve better than gin, dear." "Kindness won't settle the bill," Agatha muttered, but softened enough to smile. "You've heard, then?" "Everyone has," Mrs Bloxby said serenely. "I'm afraid gossip spreads faster than influenza." Across the room, voices rose. "I heard she's in trouble with the taxman." "No, it's a politician's affair." Or was it stolen jewels? Agatha's eye twitched. She downed half her gin. Just then the payphone by the door rang, a rare event since the pub preferred conversation to technology. Joe, the landlord, lifted the receiver, listened and bellowed, "Agatha Raisin, call for you." She took it with suspicion. "Yes?" "Aggie, darling." Roy Silver's voice fizzed down the line like a shaken bottle of Prosecco. "I've read everything. Cotswold PR Queen in Cyberstorm." Fabulous headline. "Spin it, Aggie. Make it about integrity, courage, standing by your girl." "I'd rather stand by a rattlesnake," Agatha said. "I'm being sued." "Darling, a lawsuit is just high-end publicity. I'll draft a press release." She slammed the receiver down before his optimism caused further damage. Bill, amused, asked, "Friend of yours?" "Enemy of taste," Agatha said. Later, the four of them, Agatha, Bill, Mrs Bloxby and Toni, sat at a corner table. Toni was quiet, stirring her orange juice as if seeking moral clarity at the bottom. "Marion Bly's reputation," Bill said, "isn't saintly. She's made enemies in Mercester, but promising to expose her is asking for trouble." "I can't ignore a threat to my agency," Agatha replied. "If Marion's really cheated people, I'll find out. If she hasn't, I'll still find out, because I refuse to be blamed for something I didn't do." Mrs Bloxby sighed softly. Do be careful, Agatha. Curiosity is a virtue in moderation. Moderation's for people with dull lives, Agatha said. Toni looked up. I can apologise to Marion. And what? Admit to sending scandal to half the Midlands? You'll only fan the flames. Leave it to me. A small silence followed. Then Bill said, Just don't get arrested, all right? If I do, bring lipstick, she replied. The next afternoon found Agatha at her dressing table applying that very lipstick, war paint in raspberry pink. She studied her reflection. Sharp blue-grey eyes, stubborn jaw, a woman far too old to mother protégés and far too vain to admit it. Hodge stretched on the bed, unimpressed. Oh, don't judge, she told him. I've handled worse dragons than Marion Bligh. She set off for Mercester, the drizzle thickening to a silver sheet. Marion's estate lay on the edge of town, a converted Georgian manor with electric gates and delusions of grandeur. The gravel drive glistened like wet sugar. Agatha pressed the intercom. Silence. She pressed again. A man's voice, clipped, disinterested, replied, Miss Bligh is not receiving visitors. Tell her Agatha Raisin is here to make peace before war. I'll inform her. The line went dead. Agatha waited 5 minutes, growing damp and irritable. No answer. Only the soft hiss of rain through laurel hedges and the distant glow of a light behind drawn curtains. She leaned against the gate, peering through. Inside the house, a single upstairs window burned yellow against the grey. Someone was awake, watching perhaps. Locked gates, she muttered. Always a bad sign. Keeps people out, keeps secrets in. She fished a notebook from her handbag and jotted the time. A clue, maybe, though what it meant she couldn't say yet. Back in the car, she sat a moment, the engine idling. A strand of hair had plastered itself to her cheek. She brushed it away and lit a cigarette. The first drag tasted of damp paper and defiance. Her answering machine would be blinking furiously by now. The village would be gossiping, Roy would be plotting headlines, and Toni would be crying into her cocoa. Typical, she said to the empty car. I do all the worrying, and someone else gets the sympathy. She drove back toward Carsley, headlights slicing the mist. Halfway down the lane, she glanced once more in the rearview mirror. The manor's light still burned, steady and secretive, as though it meant to outlast the night. Stay awake, Marion, Agatha said aloud. Tomorrow we'll see which of us keeps her promise. The next morning dawned sullen and damp, the Cotswolds doing their best impression of a wet sponge. Agatha Raisin drove toward Mercester with Bill Wong beside her, both of them silent except for the rhythmic squeak of the wipers. Agatha's nerves were prickling. She had spent the night replaying the image of that locked manor and the light burning upstairs like a watchful eye. You don't have to come, Bill said mildly. Don't be absurd, she snapped. If Marion Bligh's planning to sue me, I'll face her before she drafts the writ. Anyway, you might need someone with more intuition than paperwork. Bill smiled faintly. I suppose that's what you call yourself now. Intuition? Among other things, Agatha said, lighting a cigarette and cracking the window. Though right now I feel like a condemned woman heading for the scaffold. When they turned through the gates of Bligh Manor, the gravel was slick and shining. No sign of movement. A single police car already stood outside the conservatory, its blue lights dimmed but present, like a bad omen taking a nap. A constable met them at the door, his face the colour of wet plaster. Detective Sergeant Wong, you better come in. We found her about an hour ago. Found who? Agatha demanded, though she already knew. Mrs. Marion Bligh. Inside, the grand house smelled of polish, wilted orchids and panic. The conservatory door stood open. Through the glass roof, the drizzle had turned to fine mist, falling on the tiled floor where Marion Bligh lay sprawled in a silk dressing gown the colour of boiled salmon. Her eyes stared toward the ceiling, wide and empty. Heart failure, murmured a uniformed doctor. She was 58, overweight, and enjoyed her sherry. Nature's patience only stretches so far. Agatha stared at the body, at the overturned dish on the table beside it, some leftover trifle, and something faintly sweet in the air. Almond, delicate but distinct. Does anyone else smell that? She asked. Bill looked at her. Smell what? Almonds. You don't usually get that from death, or trifle unless someone's been heavy-handed with the extract. The doctor gave her a patronizing smile. Nothing unusual, madam. Best let us handle it. Agatha bit back the retort that wanted to escape. She crouched instead, eyeing the floor. A small piece of paper lay beneath the table leg, half crumpled. She slipped on a latex glove someone had discarded and retrieved it, a printed email. The first line read, "I promise you'll have the proof soon." She felt her stomach drop. Toni's email. "Bill," she said quietly, passing it to him, "before anyone else sees that." He scanned it, frowning. "Where did you find this?" "Under the table. Don't tell me that's coincidence." "Could be," he said, but without conviction. Toni arrived an hour later, white-faced and shaking. Agatha met her outside to spare her the sight inside. "I killed her," Toni whispered. "I wrote that stupid message and now she's dead. She must have read it and—" "Don't start that melodrama," Agatha said, though her voice was gentler than usual. "If guilt could kill people, the village would be a graveyard." "But it was my email beside her." "That only proves someone wanted it there, and we'll find out who." Toni looked ready to cry again. Agatha handed her a handkerchief she'd once borrowed from Charles and never returned. "Blow your nose and pull yourself together. If you must sob, do it quietly. Reporters can smell emotion at 50 paces. They stood under the dripping eaves. Across the drive, a small crowd of locals had gathered behind the police tape, umbrellas blooming like poisonous flowers. Doris Simpson was among them, clearly having abandoned cleaning duties for front-row gossip. "You'll never live this down," Agatha muttered. "Half of Carsley probably thinks we're running a murder agency now." Toni sniffed. "Maybe I should just tell the police everything." "Not until we know what everything is," Agatha replied. "For all we know, someone planted that email to frame you." Bill approached, his notebook shut. "Agatha, can I have a word? Alone, please." Toni retreated to the car. "We're treating it as suspicious," Bill said quietly. "The coroner found traces of cyanide in the trifle. Small dose, but enough." "Cyanide," Agatha repeated. "That explains the almond scent." "Keep that to yourself for now. The press haven't got wind of it yet." Agatha nodded. Her mind raced. Trifle, almonds, stolen laptop, email. The connections teased but refused to tie themselves into sense. "And the laptop?" she asked. "Still missing. We'll circulate serial numbers." "Good luck with that," she said. "Half of Mercester probably buys second-hand from blokes in pub car parks." Bill gave her the weary look of a man who knew arguing was pointless. "Promise me you'll let us investigate properly this time." "Of course," Agatha said sweetly. He narrowed his eyes. "That's exactly what you said last time." Back in Carsley, the village was buzzing like a disturbed hive. By the time Agatha reached the Red Lion that evening, rumours had already evolved into folklore. "They say she choked on trifle," said Joe the landlord. "Terrible way to go." "They say she was poisoned," countered Doris, "with rat killer from the WI pantry." "They say she was hexed," added someone else cheerfully. Agatha ordered a gin and considered hexing the lot of them. The pub's warmth couldn't chase away the image of Marian's still body, that faint almond tang. Mrs Bloxby arrived, umbrella dripping, her calm presence somehow making the scene less vulgar. "I heard about poor Mrs Bly," she said softly. "You were there?" "Unfortunately," Agatha replied, "and now the girl's convinced she's a murderess. You wouldn't think innocence could be so irritating." Mrs Bloxby gave her a patient look. "She's young. Guilt is easier to imagine than grief at that age." "At my age, grief just gives you wrinkles," Agatha said, then immediately felt shabby. "Do you believe Toni's innocent?" "Yes, which probably means she'll be arrested by breakfast." Mrs Bloxby smiled faintly. "Then you'll have work to do." Agatha drained her glass. "I always do." At home, Hodge greeted her with offended dignity, tail flicking. Agatha poured herself a final gin and stood at the window. Rain traced glistening threads down the glass. The phone rang. She nearly ignored it, then lifted the receiver. Bill's voice came through, low and tired. "Just got word from the coroner's office," he said. "You were right. Cyanide. And one more thing. That email you found was printed yesterday evening, before the message was sent." Agatha stared at the receiver. "Before?" "Yes. So whoever printed it already had access to the text." "Which means they had Toni's computer," she said slowly. "Or a copy of her files. Either way, this isn't over." "Nothing ever is," she said, and hung up. She turned back to Hodge, who had curled on her armchair, indifferent to crime and consequence. The cat yawned widely, displaying a pink tongue and utter disinterest. "Don't look smug," Agatha told him, lighting a cigarette. "You'd have made a dreadful detective. No curiosity, and an alarming fondness for milk." Outside, Carsley's cottages glowed faintly through mist. Somewhere a church bell chimed 9. The case had only just begun, but already Agatha felt the peculiar thrill that always accompanied danger, and the first stirrings of vanity at being needed again. She exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "Well, Hodge," she murmured, "if there's one thing we can count on, it's that the dead never keep quiet for long." The cat flicked an ear and went back to sleep. Carsley woke to find itself famous, and it relished every minute. Marian Bligh's death had made the Mercester Gazette front page, complete with a blurred photo of Agatha leaving the manor, looking, as she discovered over toast, like a furious badger in a raincoat. By mid-morning, the gossip machine was whirring hard enough to power the church bells. At the village shop, someone whispered that the girl from Raisin's office had poisoned a trifle. At the post office, they added, "for love." Doris Simpson, scrubbing Agatha's sink with moral intensity, sighed. "It's a shame, Mrs. Raisin. People are saying you organised the very stall where that trifle came from." Agatha froze, cigarette halfway to her mouth. "The WI dessert stall? That was my fundraiser, for the vicarage roof." "Yes," said Doris, cheerfully twisting the knife. "Of course, nobody's blaming you directly, but it's funny, isn't it? Murder by pudding." Agatha crushed the cigarette into the sink, sparks flying from her temper. "If I ever kill someone, Doris, it won't be with dairy. It'll be deliberate." Still the thought lingered unpleasantly. Her precious WI event, her banner, her bunting, her desperate attempt to prove she could do wholesome, had apparently supplied a murder weapon. She rang Bill Wong at once. "Was Marian Bligh's trifle from my stall?" she demanded. "Calm down, Agatha," Bill said. "We're checking all sources. But yes, her cleaner confirmed she bought one. Cherry and almond, if you must know." "Cherry and almond," Agatha repeated grimly. "How poetic. That's the scent I noticed. The almonds. Cyanide." "We're running lab tests," said Bill. "And please don't spread that theory. The press—" "I am the press, dear," she interrupted and slammed down the phone. At 11:30, she marched to the vicarage to find Mrs. Bloxby, the one woman in Carsley still unstartled by her. "Mrs. Bligh was poisoned with trifle from my event," Agatha announced the moment she was shown in. "Do sit down," said Mrs. Bloxby serenely. "You'll wear out the carpet." Agatha sat, fuming. The vicar's wife poured tea as if the world had not collapsed into custard. "If you remember," Mrs. Bloxby said, "we used 3 volunteers to make those trifles. Yourself, Mrs. Cummings-Brown, and Doris." "Doris?" Agatha looked appalled. "She can't even make instant pudding without summoning the fire brigade." "Then perhaps the answer lies elsewhere," Mrs. Bloxby said mildly. "Perhaps Marian had her own reasons for choosing that one. Or someone had a reason for choosing her," Agatha said darkly. At that moment, the vicar's telephone rang. Mrs. Bloxby answered, listened, and handed it to Agatha. "It's Roy," she murmured, sounding faintly apologetic. "Aggie, darling," came the effervescent voice. "You're all over the news. PR queen linked to pudding murder. It's practically Shakespearean." "You're enjoying this far too much," she said. "Of course I am. You couldn't buy coverage like this. Now I've drafted a statement, something about integrity, truth, and dessert safety. Shall I fax it over?" "Fax it to hell, Roy." "Bit slow on the connection, darling," he quipped and hung up. Agatha groaned. Mrs. Bloxby's calm gaze held sympathy, which only made her feel worse. "I suppose," Agatha muttered, "there's nothing like scandal to remind one of one's popularity." "Or one's vulnerability," said Mrs. Bloxby gently. By afternoon, Carsley was alive with theories. Agatha's telephone rang incessantly, reporters, clients, neighbours pretending concern. She finally pulled the plug from the wall and poured herself a gin. Hodge, curled like a smug cushion, opened one eye as if to approve the decision. A sharp knock came at the door. She opened it to find Charles Fraith standing there in his impeccable jacket, the rain beading politely on his shoulders. He held a bottle of Pouilly Fumé and the expression of a man certain he was rescuing a damsel, albeit one with claws. "I heard about your scandal," he said cheerfully. "Thought you might need civilized company." "Civilized company is overrated," Agatha said, but took the wine. They settled in her sitting room, fire blazing, rain muttering against the panes. Charles lounged while Agatha paced. "So," he said, "you've managed to connect a death, a trifle, and your assistant's love life. Impressive even by your standards." "Someone's framing Toni," she said. "That email was printed before she sent it. Bill confirmed it." Charles raised an eyebrow. Meaning someone accessed her computer? Exactly. Which means whoever stole her laptop also had a reason to want Marion dead. You do realise, dear, that's everyone in Mercester with a pulse, she glared. You're no help. On the contrary, I brought wine and perspective. One of them may prove useful. Agatha poured generously. If I find the person who did this, I'll write about it in your memoirs. No, poison them with trifle. They laughed, though Agatha's heart wasn't in it. She found herself glancing at the phone, half hoping Bill would ring with a confession, half dreading he'd ring with an arrest. Charles stretched. So, what's next? Door-to-door pudding inspections? I'm starting with Marion's cleaner, Agatha said. People like her know everything. They just need permission to gossip. The cleaner, a brisk woman named Elsie Trotter, opened the manor's side door with the suspicious air of someone guarding Buckingham Palace. You the one from the papers? She asked. I'm the one they've slandered, Agatha corrected, and if you're smart, you'll help me unslander myself. Elsie sniffed but let her in. Mrs Bly bought that trifle from your stall, yes. Said she fancied something homemade for once. Ate half the thing before bed. Did she have visitors? Just Mr Weatherby, her business partner, left about 7, and that girl of hers, the secretary, came round with papers. Agatha took mental notes, filing names with satisfaction. And you noticed nothing odd? Smells, arguments, strangers lurking? Elsie pursed her lips. Only odd thing was her asking me to polish the conservatory table twice yesterday. Said she wanted it to shine. She never cared for house pride before. Perhaps she was expecting company, Agatha said. Perhaps she was expecting judgment, Elsie replied, eyes sharp. Agatha left with a head full of half-formed theories and a growing list of suspects. Back home, the fire was out and Hodge had claimed the warmest chair. Agatha replaced him with a blanket, earning a look of feline reproach. Roy's fax was waiting on the table. Against her better judgment, she read it. Statement from Agatha Raisin. We at Raisin and Associates uphold truth, decency and good desserts for all. She groaned aloud. I'll kill him next. As she reached for the phone, it rang. Charles again. Before you start shouting, he said, I've just remembered something useful. That timing Bill mentioned. My chap at the Gazette confirmed it. The printout was made the night before Toni sent her email. Meaning the thief had it already, Agatha said. Meaning, Charles replied, your killer was organised enough to plan both the scandal and the murder. I'd toast to that level of efficiency if it weren't so revolting. Agatha paced, smoke curling in the lamplight. Then the laptop's the key. Whoever has it can prove Toni's innocence or her guilt. Or both, said Charles. Don't confuse me with philosophy, she said. I deal in facts and fingernails. And vanity, he added smoothly. That too. When she hung up, the house felt oddly still. Outside, drizzle whispered against the windows. Inside, Hodge resumed his snoring, indifferent to human folly. Agatha lit a final cigarette and watched the smoke curl like thought itself. Somewhere in Mercester, her laptop thief and murderer was congratulating themselves. She tapped ash into the tray and muttered, Enjoy it while you can, dear. The Cotswolds always turn on their villains eventually. Hodge opened one golden eye, unimpressed. Agatha smiled thinly. At least you don't gossip, she said. The evening drizzle returned as if the Cotswolds had decided that dampness suited them. Agatha Raisin, however, was dry of patience. She needed information, gossip and gin, preferably in that order. The Red Lion promised all three. The pub's windows glowed amber against the mist. Inside, the air smelled of beer, chips and conversation at half-whispered pitch. Every villager capable of forming an opinion had gathered there to exercise it. Agatha entered like a storm cloud in heels, trench coat flaring, eyes sharp. Evening, Mrs Raisin, said Joe, the landlord, too heartily. The usual? Double gin, no tonic. I'm past the age for dilution. Joe poured with cautious respect. The crowd quietened, subtle heads turning. Agatha could almost hear the phrase forming, There she is. Charles Fraith waved from a corner booth, an island of lazy composure amid the noise. He had already charmed half the barmaids and was now defending Agatha's reputation in the tone one uses to discuss the weather. Ah, here she comes, he said as she joined him, the woman who puts the public in publicity. Mock if you like, she said, settling opposite. At least I'm doing something. The police are moving slower than parish council minutes. And you're canvassing suspects between crisps and condiments. Precisely. She looked around, eyes narrowing. Every soul in this place knows something. They just need encouragement or flattery. Charles smiled. Flattery has never been your strong suit, Aggie. That's because it's usually wasted on idiots, she said, standing. Her first stop was Joe himself, polishing the bar as if he hoped to erase scandal with elbow grease. You rented one of your cottages to Marion Bligh, didn't you? Agatha asked. Aye, he said warily, and I'll tell you this, never again. She wanted the rent lowered because the damp offended her. I said the damp offended everyone, but we put up with it. You argued? Only once. She threatened to report me to environmental health, said I was running a mildew museum. Agatha's lips twitched. And you didn't wish her dead? Not enough to poison pudding, Joe said, though his grin was a shade too broad. She left him to his pint and drifted toward the fireplace, where two women whispered energetically over half-empty glasses. She caught her name, paused, and pretended to study the brass horse brasses. They say it was Raisin's own trifle what did her in, said one. Nonsense, man, said the other. Her trifles are terrible. Nobody could eat enough to die from it. Agatha turned sweetly. You're right, she said. It's my scones that are lethal. The women flushed scarlet. Charles watched the performance with amused detachment. When she returned, he pushed the chips toward her. How goes the charm offensive? Offensive is right, Agatha muttered. They're all so smug. You'd think gossip were a moral duty. It is, here, he said. National pastime. A familiar voice interrupted. Evening, Mrs. Raisin. The man was lanky, in a denim jacket with a logo reading Cotswold Computer Repairs. He had the eager look of someone who mistook conversation for advertising. You're the detective lady, right? He said. I heard about the laptop. Terrible business. I fix computers all over, half the village, truth be told. Passwords, printers, the lot. People round here can't tell a mouse from a modem. Can you tell a murderer from a meddler? Agatha asked. He chuckled uneasily. Just saying, if that girl's laptop's gone missing, I could track it. Numbers, codes, serials, all that. For a price? Small one, he admitted. But I'm good with secrets, digital and otherwise. She eyed him. What's your name? Pete Turnbull. Do you ever work for Marion Bligh? Once. She had a password problem last year. Changed it every week. Paranoid about her business partner Giles Weatherby. Said he'd try to steal her files. Agatha's mind clicked like a camera shutter. Did she say why? Something about dodgy accounts. I didn't pry, but she paid cash and told me never to mention I'd been there. And did you? Only to my wife, he said, which in Castley meant to everyone. Agatha returned to her table, exhilarated. Giles Weatherby again, she told Charles, the partner who argued with her outside the bank. I'm beginning to see a pattern. Triangles, dear, he said lazily. Your life's full of them. Bill Wong arrived mid-evening, rain on his coat and disapproval in his eyes. He ordered a pint and approached like a schoolteacher about to confiscate contraband. Agatha, he said, lowering his voice, you promised to let us handle this. And I am. I'm handling it far better than you are. You can't interrogate people in a pub. I'm chatting. There's a difference. Besides, you get more truth after 2 pints than during formal questioning. You'll also get sued if you keep throwing accusations around. Only if I'm wrong. Agatha, she smiled sweetly. Oh, Bill, stop worrying. I'm too charming to arrest. Charles choked on his drink. I'll testify to that. Bill muttered something about paperwork and left. Agatha watched him go with fond irritation. He would never understand that curiosity was her only real hobby, unless you counted vanity. The evening wore on. The pub grew louder, warmer, and more dangerous for waistlines. Agatha extracted one more tidbit from an elderly farmer who claimed he'd seen Giles and Marion quarrelling outside the Mercester Bank 2 days before she died. She called him a thief, he said she'd see him in court. And he said? Couldn't hear, tractor passing, but he looked fit to burst. Men always do when women outsmart them, Agatha said. By closing time, she'd filled several napkins with scribbled notes. Joe the landlord, motive, revenge. Pete Turnbull, motive, secrets. Giles Weatherby, motive, fraud. The trouble was, none of them had the imagination to poison a pudding. Charles leaned back, stretching. Satisfied? Never, Agatha said. There's still one missing piece. The promise. The what? That wretched line from the email. I promise you'll have the proof soon. Cryptic nonsense, he said. No. Someone wanted Marion to think Toni betrayed a confidence. A promise must mean something specific. Money, blackmail, an affair. People don't kill for poetry. They do for pride, said Charles quietly. Agatha looked at him, surprised by the flicker of seriousness. He smiled again, lazy mask restored. But what would I know? I live off mine. Later, at home, the world felt too quiet. Hodge slept curled on the sofa, tail twitching. The cottage smelled of damp wool and cigarette smoke. Agatha switched on the kettle and listened to its impatient rattle. Her fax machine whirred suddenly, breaking the silence. She crossed the room, unease prickling. The page slid out, white and stark. The promise wasn't hers to make. No sender, no number. The same words she'd just spoken at the pub. She stood motionless, heart hammering with the slow thrill of being right, and the cold dread of being watched. "So you are listening?" she murmured to the empty room. "How cosy of you." The kettle clicked off behind her, forgotten. Hodge stretched, blinked once, and yawned, unimpressed by human melodrama. Agatha tore the fax free, folded it, and slid it into her handbag. "Someone in Carsley," she said aloud, "wants to help, or frighten. Either way, they've chosen the wrong woman." She lit a cigarette, exhaled toward the window, and watched her own reflection fade into the night drizzle. "I'll find you," she said softly. "And when I do, I'll decide whether to thank you or throttle you." Hodge gave a small, sleepy meow. Yes, yes, Agatha sighed. First things first. More gin. Sunday afternoon in Carsley arrived, wrapped in drizzle and the faint smell of scones. Agatha Raisin, dressed in her best attempt at respectability, a tweed skirt, low heels, and a grim expression, marched up the vicarage path with Toni Gilmore and Bill Wong trailing behind. She disliked moral ambushes disguised as tea, and Mrs Bloxby's invitations always had a whiff of gentle correction. Inside, the sitting room glowed with lamplight. Mrs Bloxby had laid the table with her usual quiet perfection, mismatched china, homemade jam, and enough civility to smother a revolution. "You're kind to come," she said serenely. "It's been such a tense week. I thought a little peace might do us all good." "Peace never solved anything," Agatha muttered, removing her coat. Bill grinned. "It's never had the chance with you around." "Hush, Bill," said Mrs Bloxby with maternal humour. "Now, scones first, confessions after." Agatha gave a short laugh but felt cornered. Toni, pale but polite, buttered her scone as if it might explode. The silence stretched. Mrs Bloxby poured tea. "Sometimes," she said mildly, "when we're frightened or ashamed, we hide behind half-truths. Forgiveness comes easier when we admit we've erred." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Are we having tea or therapy?" "A bit of both, perhaps." "Then I'll need gin in mine." Laughter broke the tension, but only for a moment. Toni's hands trembled slightly as she lifted her cup. "You've done nothing criminal, my dear," Mrs Bloxby said kindly. "A mistake, yes, but we all make them." "Some people only confess when they've run out of lies," Agatha said suddenly. The words came too sharply, like a drawer slammed shut. A shadow crossed Toni's face. Bill's spoon paused mid-stir. Mrs Bloxby said gently, "That was unkind, Agatha." Agatha sighed. "I'm sorry. It's just, this whole business feels like one long humiliation. I've spent my life dodging gossip, not starring in it." Toni set down her cup. "It isn't about you." "Of course it's about me," Agatha retorted. "My name's on the blasted agency. My reputation—" "Your reputation will survive," Bill interrupted, calm as ever. "It usually does." Agatha wanted to argue, but Mrs Bloxby's steady gaze silenced her. The conversation turned to weather, local fates, and, fatally, to Marion Bligh. "Terrible thing," Mrs Bloxby murmured, "but perhaps it will remind us that pride goes before a fall." "Or before pudding," Agatha said, "depending on the recipe." Even she had to smile at that, though the humour did little to soothe the ache behind her temples. After tea, Agatha walked home through misty lanes, cigarette glowing like a small rebellion. Bill drove off to Mercester, and Toni claimed she was going home to rest. Agatha half believed her, until she saw a familiar blue hatchback parked near the village green an hour later. Toni sat inside, talking animatedly to a man leaning in through the window. Even through the fog, Agatha recognized him. Giles Weatherby, Marian's business partner. His face, slick with charm and something less wholesome, had appeared in every article about the case. Agatha slowed her car, the thrill of outrage cutting through the drizzle. So, Toni's rest involved secret chats with suspects. When Toni arrived back at the agency next morning, Agatha was waiting. She had arranged her office like a battlefield, ashtray loaded, arms folded. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Not really," Toni said cautiously. "Perhaps next time a conversation with Giles Weatherby will help." Toni's eyes widened. "You followed me?" "Don't flatter yourself. Half the village saw you. What on earth were you doing?" "He called me. Said he could explain Marian's death. He wanted to talk privately." "Privately with a man old enough to know better and rich enough to be dangerous. He's not like that." "They never are until they are," Agatha snapped. "You think you're worldly, but you're a lamb in lipstick." Toni flushed scarlet. "You can't control who I speak to." "I can when you work for me." "That's just it," Toni burst out. "You don't let anyone work for you. You just bark orders and sulk when people don't worship you." The words hit harder than Agatha expected. "I'm trying to protect you," she said stiffly. "No, you're trying to prove you're cleverer than everyone else." "At least I've had practice," Agatha retorted, but the fight drained from her voice. Toni grabbed her bag. "You know what, Mrs. Raisin? You don't need me. You've got your mystery, your gin, and your headlines. Enjoy them." The door slammed so hard the framed Businesswoman of the Year certificate trembled. Hodge, startled from his nap on the windowsill, gave her a reproachful look. Agatha glared back. "Don't you start." The afternoon dragged. Agatha stared at her paperwork without seeing it. Every file seemed to contain Toni's handwriting. Every memory replayed that furious face. She poured a gin, then another. Charles telephoned at 5:30. "I hear your apprentice has flounced off. I'd offer sympathy, but I'm saving it for worthier causes." "Go to hell, Charles." "I would, but I'd only bump into you there," he said cheerfully. "Want company?" "No." "Excellent. I'll be round in 10. She hung up on him, but smiled despite herself. Charles's brand of charm was like aspirin, irritating yet oddly effective. When he arrived, bearing takeaway curry and wine, the kitchen filled with spicy comfort and lazy banter. But even he couldn't quite pierce her gloom. "You care about that girl," he said finally, scooping rice onto his plate. "That's your problem. You only know how to fight people you love." "Nonsense, I love no one. Except yourself, which is why you're so furious when the rest of us forget to." Agatha threw him a look sharp enough to slice naan. "You really are an insufferable man. And yet here I am, sharing your curry instead of dining at my club. Because I'm more interesting than your club. Because my club doesn't serve gin this strong." She almost laughed, but caught herself. The evening dwindled into silence, both too proud for comfort. When Charles left, the house felt enormous and empty. At 10:30, just as Agatha was considering bed, the fax machine stirred. She frowned. The sound had become ominous, a herald of trouble. The page emerged slowly, inch by inch. It was a typed list. Marian Bligh. Appointments. Monday, 10:00 a.m. Solicitor. 12:30 lunch with Weatherby. 3 at meeting. Cancelled. The final entry was circled in red ink. Giles Weatherby. Private discussion. 5 p.m. Agatha stared at it. The paper smelled faintly of toner and danger. "So you were her last appointment," she murmured. "And you're chatting up my assistant. Interesting timing." She folded the page carefully, slipped it into a file, and lit a cigarette. Smoke drifted upward, slow and thoughtful. Hodge leapt onto the desk, tail curling round her arm. She stroked his head absently. "Men are useless. Cats are smug, and girls are heartbreak. Remind me why I ever employ anyone." Hodge blinked, unimpressed by philosophy. "Exactly," she said, exhaling. "You never argue, never betray me, and you don't send emails." Outside, rain began again, steady as regret. Agatha watched the blurred reflections of street lamps shimmer on wet cobbles. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows the truth was shifting, whispering, and she meant to catch it. She stubbed out her cigarette. "Tomorrow, Mr. Weatherby. Let's see what promises you were making." The Cotswold evening unfolded with theatrical precision, soft drizzle, fading pink skies, and the faint smell of damp roses. Agatha Raisin, who disliked nature unless it stayed politely outside her windows, stood on the gravel drive of Fraith Manor, feeling both impressed and irritated. Charles had invited her to a small dinner for intelligence gathering, which in his vocabulary meant fine wine, questionable company, and plenty of chances to feel superior. The manor glowed with warm light. A discreet butler opened the door, eyeing Agatha's leopard print scarf as though it might startle the silver. "Madam," he said. "Don't sound so surprised," she replied, brushing rain off her coat. Inside, the dining room shimmered with polished wood, candles, and Charles's effortless wealth. The table glittered under the chandelier like an altar to social manipulation. "Aggie, my dear," Charles called from the hearth, "you're just in time. Everyone's already sizing each other up." "Lovely. I do hate missing the opening salvo." He kissed her cheek, smelling infuriatingly of bergamot and ease. "You know Giles Weatherby, of course, from our local scandal. And that's Pete Turnbull, the computer man you nearly accused of murder last week. And finally, Mr. Neville Vane, food critic for the Cotswold Life." Vane was a thin man with a face like sour cream. He looked Agatha up and down and murmured, "I've reviewed worse outfits than that." Agatha smiled sweetly. "And I've read worse writing, though not often." Charles coughed into his napkin to hide laughter. Dinner was announced and they filed into the adjoining room. The table was set for mischief. Charles at the head, Agatha opposite him, with Giles on one side and Pete on the other. Vane sat beside her, already snuffling at the bouquet of his wine. "Ah, pouilly fumé," he said, one of the few whites that can almost justify its existence. "How comforting for it," Agatha murmured. The first course arrived, smoked trout pâté, delicate and smug. Charles began the evening's true entertainment, conversation as blood sport. "So, Giles," he said, his tone mild, "must be difficult, losing a business partner in such dramatic circumstances." Giles's fork paused mid-air. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, come now," said Agatha, her eyes glinting. "You and Marion were seen shouting outside the Mercester Bank. You must admit, it's become something of a local opera." "We had disagreements, yes," he said curtly. "Marion was under pressure. She'd made poor investments. I was trying to protect her reputation." "By embezzling from the property fund?" Agatha asked. Charles gave her a warning look. Giles stiffened. "That's a nasty rumour, completely unfounded." "Rumours usually are," Agatha said sweetly, "until they're not." The food critic gave a delicate cough. "Speaking of poison, figuratively of course, have any of you tried the trifle at the Red Lion recently? I found it quite lethal." Agatha shot him a glare sharp enough to slice fruit. Pete Turnbull, oblivious to the tension, leaned forward. "Talking of trifles, I heard the police found cyanide in Marion's. Terrible, that. But fascinating, too, from a technical standpoint." "Technical?" Agatha asked. "Well, cyanide's hard to trace once digested. Needs a chemist's touch. I read about it on the internet." "How comforting," Charles said dryly. "You and your poisons." Pete grinned. "Computers are my poisons, really. People think they're private, but nothing ever disappears. Deleted files are just hidden, like sins waiting to be found." Agatha arched a brow. "Including Toni Gilmore's laptop, I suppose?" "Oh, I've worked on her system before. Backed up some emails, fixed a virus. Nice girl. Trusting." Agatha felt her stomach tighten. "You still have those backups?" "Might have," he said, enjoying the effect. "Can't recall. Clients forget what they ask for." Charles intervened smoothly. "You do realize you're confessing to potential blackmail over the soup?" Pete laughed. "Hardly. Just saying I know things. Digital things." Neville Vane snorted. "You sound like a man compensating for the absence of social ones." The table rippled with uneasy laughter. By the main course, beef Wellington and pointed civility, the tension had sharpened. Agatha played the perfect hostess detective, smiling while watching everyone else's eyes. Giles was sweating under his charm. Pete's arrogance was curdling into nerves, and Vane was drinking as though tasting notes were a moral duty. "Tell me, Giles," she said lightly, "did Marion ever threaten to expose you?" "No," he said too quickly. She wanted to audit the accounts, that's all." "Ah," said Agatha, So she didn't call you a thief in public. People mishear things. Indeed they do, she said, especially when there's shouting involved. Charles's eyes flicked warningly at her again, but she ignored him. She was enjoying herself too much, and besides, she'd had 2 glasses of wine. Dessert arrived, mercifully not trifle. Vane predictably critiqued it. Slightly overset, one might say, constrained. So am I, Agatha muttered. After coffee, Charles led them to the drawing-room for brandy. The men relaxed slightly. Agatha pretended to. But beneath the smoke and chatter, something dark fluttered. Giles checked his watch repeatedly. Pete fiddled with his lighter, setting it down, picking it up again. Charles leaned toward Agatha. Satisfied? You've ruffled every feather in sight. Ruffled feathers show what's underneath, she said, and Giles is hiding more than a few. You're impossible, he murmured, and yet you keep inviting me. He smiled, conceding the point. By 10 o'clock, the guests began to leave. Vane stumbled out muttering about deadlines. Giles made a curt farewell. Pete offered Agatha a conspiratorial wink. Don't stay up too late reading crime novels, he said. Oh, I prefer writing them in real time, she replied. Charles closed the door and turned to her. You could at least let people leave without suspicion trailing behind them like confetti. If I did that, they'd all relax, and the truth would stay buried. You're becoming addicted to this, and you're addicted to watching me fail. Not fail, Charles said quietly. Just flail. There's a difference. She softened for half a second, then reached for her coat. Thank you for dinner. I'll try to flail gracefully. Outside, the drizzle had turned to mist. Her car gleamed under the drive lamps like a silver beetle. She drove home through the hedgerows, the road curling through darkness. Her thoughts tangled. Giles's defensiveness, Pete's boast, the food critic's smug irrelevance. When she reached her cottage, Hodge greeted her with imperial indifference. She fed him, poured a small gin, and sank into her armchair. The night was too quiet, the kind that made one listen for footsteps that weren't there. She had just begun to relax when the telephone rang. She answered sharply. Mrs. Raisin? It was Bill Wong. His voice carried that weary tone reserved for bad news. Oh, don't sound like that, she said. I've had enough gloom for one day. You might want to sit down. I am sitting. Pete Turnbull's been found unconscious in his van. Cyanide poisoning. There was a trifle tin beside him, same scent as Marion Bly's. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink around the receiver. Alive? She asked. Just barely. We've sent him to Mercester General. No witnesses, no note. You think he was trying to kill himself? Or someone wanted to shut him up? Agatha's hand tightened on the receiver. He said he backed up Toni's files. If that's true, someone wanted those files buried. Then keep your nose clean, Agatha. Whoever this is, they're playing for keeps. Bill, I never keep my nose clean. It's my least attractive feature. He sighed. Just be careful. She hung up slowly. Hodge had jumped onto the arm of her chair, tail flicking, eyes unblinking. Another one down, she said softly. And the trifle again. If I ever eat dessert again, shoot me. She lit a cigarette, the flame briefly warming her face. The rain tapped the window with maddening delicacy, as if applauding her folly. Well, Hodge, she murmured, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. That's 2 poisoned trifles and a list of suspects with appetites. Carsley's turning into a culinary crime wave. The cat yawned, unimpressed. Agatha sipped her gin. And to think, all I wanted was a quiet dinner. The Cotswold morning sulked behind low clouds, the colour of unwashed wool. Agatha Raisin, in no mood for subtlety, jabbed at her telephone as if it were personally to blame for the weather. Bill Wong answered on the 4th ring, his voice weary but amused. You'll be glad to know, Agatha, your computer man's still breathing. Barely, I hope, she said. People who flirt with me then collapse are beginning to form a pattern. You're not funny. I wasn't trying to be. Bill sighed. He's in Mercester General under police guard. His van's been impounded. Someone wiped every machine in his workshop, clean as a saint's conscience. Which means, Agatha said, lighting a cigarette, that someone's trying to cover their digital tracks, or your lot are even worse at security than usual. Do try not to get arrested today. Why start now? She hung up, the smell of smoke already curling through her sitting room. Hodge stretched on the sofa, unimpressed. Don't look at me like that, she said. You've never trusted anyone with a fish either. By afternoon, Agatha had bullied Charles into joining her on what she called a small fact-finding stroll, and he immediately renamed breaking and entering. "You realize this is illegal," he said, steering his vintage convertible into the Mercester industrial estate. "Illegal is such a strong word. We're merely checking facts at night with torches and questionable keys." "That's the definition of burglary." "Semantics." Rain spattered the windscreen. The estate was a row of grey units, all locked, all unlovely. Pete Turnbull's workshop sat halfway along, its sign half-lit. Cotswold computer repairs, discretion guaranteed. "Rather ironic, don't you think?" Charles murmured. "Less talk, more torch." Agatha produced a ring of keys borrowed temporarily from Doris Simpson's nephew, who knew people. The third one fit. The lock clicked open. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and burnt circuitry. A line of dark monitors sat dead on the workbenches, cables drooping like withered vines. "Cheerful place," Charles said, "like Frankenstein's office after the electricity bill arrived." Agatha ignored him, sweeping her torch across the room. The computers had been gutted, hard drives removed, drawers emptied, papers shredded. Someone thorough, someone frightened. "They even took the biscuit tin," she muttered. "That's not crime, that's cruelty." Charles's beam landed on a small teapot perched oddly on a shelf above the kettle. How domestic. Perhaps he took tea breaks between acts of extortion. Agatha peered closer. The lid rattled when she touched it. Inside, wrapped in cling film, was a small USB drive. "Oh, marvellous," said Charles. "A clue in a teapot. How perfectly British." "And you thought my methods lacked refinement." She pocketed it, ignoring his smirk. Back in the car, Charles connected the drive to his laptop, one of his rare moments of usefulness. "You do realize," he said, "that if this contains anything scandalous, I'll be morally obliged to read it aloud. If it contains your bank statements, I'll throw it out the window." The screen flickered, then displayed a series of recovered documents. Many were fragments, half-corrupted emails time-stamped within a week of Marion Bligh's death. Agatha leaned closer. One message stood out. From Marion Bligh to Giles Weatherby. Subject, the promise. "The promise must be kept, or I'll tell them everything." Agatha read it twice, her mind already whirring. "She wasn't talking about romance," she said. "It's money, a deal gone sour." "Or an affair with financial benefits," Charles offered. "You'd see a love affair in a shopping list." "Only when the quantities are suspicious." She scrolled further. Another email fragment appeared, half deleted but legible enough. "Beneficiary changed without my consent. He'll ruin us both if this gets out." "Beneficiary," she murmured. "Property deeds. She and Giles co-owned the business fund. If she changed the paperwork, that's motive enough for murder." "And who's he?" Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Toni's charming boyfriend, the one who started this mess. He's mixed up in it somehow." "You mean the boy with the chin and no prospects?" "That's the one." Charles closed the laptop. "So, the great detective has unearthed blackmail, betrayal, and property fraud, all from a teapot. Do I get a medal?" "You get to drive me home and pretend this never happened." "Already regretting it." "Nonsense. You love it when I break the law attractively." "Attractively is debatable." She smiled into the dark. Carsley greeted them with drizzle thick enough to qualify as weather abuse. Agatha dropped her coat on the rack, kicked off her damp shoes, and poured 2 generous gins. Charles accepted his with mock solemnity. "To crime and punishment, preferably someone else's." "To evidence," she corrected, clinking glasses. "The kind Bill will pretend he found himself." Hodge leapt onto the armchair, tail flicking at Charles's presence. "You see," said Agatha, "even my cat disapproves of you." "Nonsense. He admires me. It's the natural instinct of all creatures." "Except women, apparently." He smiled. "You included." She ignored him, inserting the USB into her office computer. The files displayed exactly as before. Among them, a folder labelled Deeds. She clicked. Inside were scans of property titles, stamped with legal seals. Ownership transferred from Bligh and Weatherby Holdings to a Mr. Thomas Gilmore. "Toni's boyfriend," she breathed. "So the lad stood to inherit something after all," said Charles. "No wonder Marion was threatening exposure." "Which means Giles arranged everything, and when Marion found out, she used the promise to keep him quiet." She probably meant to report him, and then someone shut her up first. Quite the deduction, Charles said, but it still doesn't explain the trifles. You never understand symbolism. The trifle was her pride, showy, layered, and fatal. You should write fortune cookies. She swatted him away, printing the crucial page. The old machine groaned like a pensioner, spitting out evidence one sheet at a time. "You'll show that to Bill?" he asked. "Not yet. Let him catch up on his own case before I solve it for him." Charles rose, stretching. "And what will you do in the meantime?" "Think, smoke, possibly regret both." He chuckled, gathering his coat. "I'll call tomorrow to see if you've been arrested." "Do." When the door shut, the silence returned. Hodge yawned. The printer still hummed faintly. Agatha gathered the papers into a neat pile and poured another drink. "The promise must be kept," she murmured. "Well, Marion, someone's about to break it again." The next morning brought no peace. Rain still fell, stubborn and steady. Agatha had barely finished her second coffee when the phone rang. "Agatha?" It was Bill, voice clipped. "Giles Weatherby's missing." "Nonsense. Men like him don't vanish. They loiter expensively." He didn't show up for his meeting. His car's still at home, but his housekeeper found a note. "What kind of note?" "Just one line. She made me do it." Agatha sat down slowly. She who? Marion's dead, Tony's innocent, and his ego's intact. Who's left? That's what we're trying to find out. And before you ask, no, you're not to interfere. Bill, I've already interfered. The question now is whether I tidy up after myself or let you bumble into the truth. For once, Agatha, could you let me finish the sentence "official investigation" without laughing? She smiled faintly. Probably not. After hanging up, she stared out the window. The rain had softened to mist, hanging low over the cottages. Somewhere, church bells rehearsed for Sunday. Hodge padded across the windowsill, pawing at the pane. She scratched behind his ear. "Don't worry, darling, I'm not done yet." The fax machine gave a sudden rattle. Agatha turned, pulse quickening. Another message slid out, its single sentence typed in bold. "The promise is broken." She held it up, the paper damp from her fingers. Outside, thunder muttered over the hills. "Well," she said, lighting another cigarette, "so much for keeping promises." Smoke drifted upward, curling through the grey air like a question with no polite answer. Hodge leapt down, curling against her feet. She reached for the phone. "Charles," she said when he answered, "cancel your lunch. We've got a ghost in the machine, and he's just sent me mail." The Cotswolds wore its drizzle like an old cardigan, familiar, sagging and slightly sour. Castle, normally so smug in its honeystone neatness, had turned hostile. Curtains twitched faster than wind, and conversation hushed mid-sentence as Agatha Raisin passed. She stalked through the village green in her trench coat, chin high, expression set to untouchable, though she felt anything but. The morning's newspaper headline had seen to that. "Poisonous PR Queen Strikes Again." The photograph beneath was ghastly, her hair frizzed by rain, her mouth mid-argument with a constable. The Mercester Herald had somehow acquired every unflattering angle of her career. "They make me look like a harpy with a handbag," she muttered. "It's not entirely inaccurate," murmured Charles beside her, carrying the groceries she'd bullied him into fetching. "You could be supportive for once." "I am. I'm carrying your cat food." "That's not support, that's servitude." "Same difference," she scowled. Roy had fled back to London after the headline, bleating something about brand optics. Bill had gone silent, preferring to deal with her as if she were a live explosive. Only Mrs Bloxby had offered tea and sympathy, both of which Agatha had accepted in large doses. Now, as they reached her cottage, Charles glanced toward the postbox overflowing with letters. "Fan mail?" "Poison pen mail," she said, yanking one free. "Shame on you, Mrs Raisin. You bring disgrace to Castle." She crumpled it. "From Doris Simpson, I'd wager. She can't stand missing a scandal." "Oh, come now. Doris only hates you on weekdays." Agatha opened the door and ushered him in, flicking on the lights with unnecessary force. Hodge appeared from nowhere, demanding dinner with imperial disdain. Charles poured her a gin without asking. "So, what's the plan, Agatha? Retire, write your memoirs, buy a deserted island?" "Don't tempt me. I'd only end up with smug goats for company." She dropped onto the sofa, kicking off her damp shoes. "It's this village. They build you up, then tear you down the moment your hair looks tragic in print. Charles raised his glass. To the Cotswold circle of hell. Cheers, she said flatly. Later that afternoon, Mrs Bloxby appeared with her usual quiet grace, as though the storm outside bowed to her decency. She brought lemon cake and a voice that could have soothed a riot. "You mustn't let it weigh on you, Mrs Raisin," she said gently. "People will believe what they choose." "Yes, and they've chosen I'm a murderer." "Only temporarily." "Oh, splendid. Perhaps they'll switch to arsonist next week." Mrs Bloxby smiled faintly. "The truth has a habit of surfacing, if one gives it time, and less smoke." Agatha paused mid-drag of her cigarette. "I'm cutting down. 2 packs a day is practically saintly." "Then you're halfway to heaven." "Which I have no intention of reaching yet," Agatha said. Mrs Bloxby set down her cup. "You've done more good than harm, even if the papers forget it. You helped that girl. You care for her." "Toni, she's furious with me." "She's young. She'll understand when she's older, or when she makes her first real mistake." She's making one right now, if she's still seeing that dreadful boyfriend." "Then pray she's wiser than we were at her age," Mrs Bloxby said, rising. "And remember, truth needs patience, and patience doesn't thrive on gin." "What does, though?" Agatha murmured after she'd gone. Evening settled in layers of grey. Agatha dozed in her armchair, the newspaper spread like a shroud across her lap. The phone rang, sharp as a slap. She reached for it, heart quickening. "Agatha Raisin speaking. If this is a journalist, I'll sue you into a coma." "It's Bill." "Oh, in that case, I'll just scold you." "Listen," he said, voice tight. "Toni's missing." Agatha sat upright. "Missing?" "She left a note for her landlady, said she was going to confront Giles Weatherby. She mentioned making it right. No one's seen her since morning." "You idiot! Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I'm telling you now. We've got a patrol car heading to Weatherby's office, but he's not answering his phone." "He won't be at the office," Agatha snapped. "He'll be somewhere quiet and dramatic. The Riverside Mill, he mentioned it once at dinner. Said he kept files there." "Agatha, don't!" But she had already hung up. Rain lashed the windscreen as she tore down the narrow lanes. The wipers flailed like frantic arms, barely keeping pace. Headlights bounced off puddles that seemed deep enough to drown gossip itself. "Mad girl," she muttered, pressing harder on the accelerator, running off to confront a conman with the emotional stability of blancmange. The derelict mill crouched by the river, its windows black sockets, its roof stooped like an old gossip leaning in. She parked crookedly, left the engine running, and sprinted through the rain, shoes sinking in mud. The door hung open. Inside, the air reeked of damp wood and panic. "Toni!" her voice echoed. A groan answered. She followed it up the creaking stairs. Giles Weatherby lay slumped against a wall, one hand pressed to his head, the other clutching a torn folder. His eyes widened at her approach. "You shouldn't be here," he gasped. "That makes 2 of us," she said, kneeling beside him. "Where's Toni?" She came to accuse me. Said Marion forced me." He winced, clutching his side. "You don't understand. Marion made me do it. She blackmailed me." "Into what?" "The fund, the properties. She said we'd both go down unless I changed the deeds. I tried to fix it, but then—" He broke off, trembling. "Then she died conveniently, you mean?" Agatha said. "No, I didn't kill her, I swear. The real killer wanted everyone to think it ended with her. But it hasn't. It never ends." A floorboard groaned below. Agatha's heart jolted. Footsteps climbed the stairs, steady, deliberate. "Stay quiet," she hissed, positioning herself between Giles and the door. Toni appeared first, soaked to the skin, eyes wide but determined. "Mrs Raisin," she said breathlessly. "He's lying. He told me Marion was innocent until she found the money missing." "Toni, this isn't the time for—" Another voice interrupted, calm, cultured. "Indeed it isn't." A tall woman stepped from the shadows of the stairwell, umbrella in hand, rain glittering on her dark coat. Agatha recognized her instantly. Helen Pratt, Marion Bligh's solicitor, always perfectly turned out and unbothered by mortal concerns. "You?" Agatha said. "This is a bit late for legal business." Helen Pratt smiled faintly. "On the contrary, I'm here to tidy up Marion's affairs." "At midnight in a mouldy mill?" "Some files are delicate, and I prefer discretion to daylight." Agatha's instincts screamed. She edged slightly toward the window, calculating escape routes. "How thoughtful," she said. "And what did you bring? Papers or poison?" "Neither, Mrs. Raisin, only truth." "That's usually more dangerous." The solicitor's eyes flicked to Giles, who tried to rise. "Mr. Weatherby, you've made a dreadful mess. You should have left well enough alone." "I told you," he shouted. "I wanted out. She said the police." "Marian always overestimated her own cleverness," Helen Pratt said coolly. "As do you." Agatha's pulse thudded. "What exactly is your role in this charming pantomime?" "Custodian, facilitator, occasionally executioner of inconvenient documents." "And inconvenient people?" The faintest smile curved her lips. "Only when necessary." Toni gasped. "You poisoned them." "Please, my dear, don't be melodramatic. I simply corrected mistakes. Marian planned to expose the scheme and Giles panicked. I merely ensured neither of them embarrassed the firm, or me. The trifle, however, was inspired, don't you think?" "You killed her over property deeds," Agatha snapped. "Over reputation, Mrs. Raisin, which you, of all people, should understand." Agatha's eyes darted toward the window. The rain had eased. She could see headlights glinting beyond the lane. "Bill," she thought. "You won't get away with this," she said aloud. "Oh, I already have. You see, my dear Giles has obligingly written a confession." Giles groaned. "She made me do it." "Yes, that should satisfy everyone," said Helen Pratt. "A tragic suicide after a guilty conscience." She stepped closer, slipping a small bottle from her pocket. "Don't move," Agatha warned, grabbing a broken chair leg. "You're bluffing." "I never bluff," said Agatha, though she nearly dropped the thing from nerves. "You wouldn't hit a solicitor," Helen Pratt said. "Watch me." The woman hesitated, then laughed softly. "You're delightful, Mrs. Raisin. Utterly vulgar, but delightful." At that moment, shouts echoed from outside. The door banged open. Bill Wong's voice rang out. "Police! Drop whatever you're holding!" Helen Pratt's composure cracked. She turned, hand tightening on the bottle. Agatha lunged. The chair leg caught the woman's wrist, sending the bottle shattering against the wall. A sharp almond scent filled the air. "Cyanide," Agatha coughed. "You really do have a signature dish." Bill and another officer stormed up the stairs, handcuffing the furious solicitor as Giles collapsed in relief. Toni, shaking, clung to the banister. "You all right?" Bill asked her gently. "I think so." She looked at Agatha. "I'm sorry. For everything." Agatha waved it off, breathless. "Apology accepted. Next time you want to play detective, take up knitting instead." Hours later, back in her cottage, Agatha sat wrapped in a blanket while Hodge purred beside her. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock and her own thoughts. She stared into the dying embers of the fire. The papers would twist it all by morning. Village sleuth saves day or Carsley's most dangerous woman strikes again. It hardly mattered. What lingered was Toni's pale, frightened face and Mrs. Bloxby's calm reminder. Truth needs patience and fewer cigarettes. Agatha lit one anyway. "Patience," she told Hodge, "is overrated." The cat blinked, unimpressed. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the village wrapped in silence and the faint promise of dawn. Agatha exhaled smoke toward the ceiling, her voice low and wry. So much for a quiet life in the country. She reached for her glass, raised it in mock salute to the empty room, and smiled, half triumphant, half tired. "To Marian, to murder, and to keeping my reputation inconveniently alive." Hodge stretched, purred, and fell back asleep. Carsley had decided to forgive itself. The drizzle was back, soft as contrition, washing the dust from the church windows and the last scandal from the lanes. The Women's Institute had resumed its bake sales, the Red Lion's gossip had cooled to simmer, and even Doris Simpson had found a new target for moral outrage. The vicar's new lawn-mower, rumoured to be electric and therefore soulless. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, staring into her teacup as if the leaves might spell out redemption. They didn't. They spelled empty, which was rather on brand. Toni stood opposite her, suitcase by the door. The girl's coat looked too thin for London. Agatha wanted to say so, but refused to sound maternal. "So," Agatha said briskly, "you're off to the big smoke. Advertising, wasn't it?" "Marketing assistant. Roy put me in touch with his firm." Toni's voice was polite, steady, the kind one used for polite strangers or difficult mothers. "Yes, well, Beware of him. Roy's the kind of man who'd sell his own aunt if the packaging was right. He's been kind, actually, Toni said. Agatha bristled. Then he must be ill. Silence fell. Hodge stretched on the windowsill, tail flicking. Agatha took a long sip of her tea, pretending not to notice the awkwardness hanging in the air. You'll need to be careful. London men are sharks, London women worse, and never put anything personal in writing. You mean like emails? Exactly. Emails are emotional suicide notes. Stick to postcards. Nobody reads those. Toni smiled faintly. I'll remember. Agatha looked up, almost softening. The girl's eyes were bright with youth and exhaustion, a combination Agatha remembered too well. You'll do fine, she said at last. Just don't forget to eat, and don't let anyone treat you like a decorative stapler. I won't, Toni's voice wavered. Thank you, for everything. Agatha waved it off. Oh, nonsense, I'm dreadful company and worse at mentoring. Off you go before I start giving hugs. I've an image to maintain. Toni laughed then, and for a moment the air between them warmed. She stepped forward, hesitated, then impulsively kissed Agatha's cheek. Goodbye, Mrs. Raisin. Goodbye, Miss Gilmore, Agatha said, deliberately formal. The door closed behind her. The silence that followed was thicker than smoke. An hour later, the phone rang. Agatha ignored it until the answering machine clicked on. Roy Silver's voice exploded from the speaker like champagne foam. Aggie, you star. The tabloids are obsessed. Village sleuth uncovers solicitor slayings. Catchy, eh? I've already pitched it as a TV special. You'd play yourself, naturally. We'll fix the lighting. Roy, Agatha said, picking up, if you say the word exclusive, I'll drive to London and bury you under your own press clippings. You're trending, darling, and the Herald wants a follow-up piece, Life After Cyanide. I said you'd give them a quote. I'll give them something, all right. Aggie, don't be ungrateful. Fame loves you. Admit it. She smiled despite herself. Fame's like gin, Roy. Splendid in moderation, catastrophic after 2 glasses. That's the spirit. Oh, and you look divine in the photo. Bit windswept, but that's rural glamour for you. Goodbye, Roy. Love you too, darling. She hung up, shaking her head. Flamboyant fool, she muttered, though the corner of her mouth betrayed her. By afternoon, Charles Fraith turned up, as inevitable as mildew. He strolled in without knocking, bearing a chilled bottle of champagne and 2 flutes he'd clearly borrowed from someone else's kitchen. To victory, he said, setting them down. The criminal vanquished, the reputation restored, and the parish safely bored again. How festive, said Agatha, lighting a cigarette. Come now, Aggie, 1 glass. For posterity. I'm not in the mood. You're never in the mood unless you've caused it. You're insufferable. True, but I do pour well. She studied him, the lazy charm, the self-satisfied grin, the faint hope he always carried like a spare tie. Charles, dear, she said sweetly, if you stay 5 more minutes, I'll have to ask you to clean something. Dishes, conscience, anything. He grinned. Message received. I'll drink both glasses myself then. Do, and don't trip over my disappointment on your way out. When he'd gone, the cottage felt oddly larger, or perhaps she felt smaller. Twilight crept across Carsley like a cat settling into its favourite chair. The drizzle returned, pattering against the panes with smug regularity. Agatha had just poured herself another cup of tea when Mrs. Bloxby arrived, carrying a Victoria sponge wrapped in foil. I thought you might fancy something sweet, she said. I've had my fill of sweetness. It gives me toothache. Mrs. Bloxby smiled and placed the cake on the table. Then consider it medicinal. Agatha fetched 2 plates. The vicar's wife observed her carefully. How are you, really? Triumphant, of course. Beloved again. Possibly sainted. Ah, said Mrs. Bloxby. So lonely. Agatha froze, fork mid-air. You do have a talent for ruining moods. You've had a shock, so has Toni. Sometimes courage leaves bruises, even when you win. Winning's overrated. It just makes you wonder why it doesn't feel better. Mrs. Bloxby's smile was kind. You kept your promise to see justice done, to protect that girl. Promises kept in kindness outlast those kept in fear. Agatha stirred her tea. You'd make an excellent epitaph writer. Thank you. I've had practice. The 2 women sat in companionable quiet. Outside, the drizzle deepened to rain. Inside, the room glowed with lamplight and the faint scent of sponge and tobacco. "You'll meddle again," Mrs Bloxby said gently, "probably before the week's out." "Good. It suits you." When the vicar's wife left, Agatha followed her to the door. The lane was slick with rain, lamps blurring to halos. She turned back inside, where Hodge had claimed the warmest spot on the windowsill. His fur gleamed under the lamplight, tail twitching like punctuation to her thoughts. "You're the only one who doesn't argue," she said, stroking him. "Smart cat," he purred, unimpressed. Agatha reached for her lighter, flicked it, and lit a final cigarette. Smoke curled lazily toward the ceiling. "Next time," she murmured, exhaling, "I'm sticking to postcards." The rain tapped its agreement, steady and sardonic, as Carsley settled back into its well-behaved calm, knowing full well it wouldn't last.